I never planned to be labeled a gold digger. I thought love and respect would be enough to prove my worth to my new family. But the whispers started the moment I moved into the Whitmore estate. "She's after Dad's money," they said. "A 65-year-old parasite." They didn't know I'd built an empire long before I met Richard Whitmore, an empire worth more than all their precious inheritance combined. I kept my silence, waiting for the perfect moment. This is the right time to hit the subscribe button, because I am about to tell you how I showed them who Margaret Everly Whitmore really is, and reminded them that sometimes the gold digger holds the real gold. The first time I walked into the Whitmore estate, I felt the weight of history pressing in from every direction. Mahogany paneling, centuries-old oil paintings, a grandfather clock that had ticked away decades of family triumphs and tragedies. It was a home that spoke of wealth, of old money, of a legacy meticulously curated to preserve the Whitmore name. I was supposed to be part of that legacy now. Margaret Everly Whitmore, the second wife of Richard Whitmore, the industrial magnate who had swept me off my feet in a world of corporate boardrooms and philanthropic galas. I thought love would be enough. I thought my presence, my devotion, my willingness to stand by Richard through his late-in-life health challenges would grant me a place in the Whitmore family. But from the moment I crossed the threshold, it was clear I was an interloper, a trespasser in a world that would never fully accept me. His children, Isabel and Andrew, stood like silent sentinels in the grand foyer that first day, their cold eyes assessing, measuring, already judging. Isabel, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and the sharp scent of expensive perfume, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to the family," she'd said, the words sweet enough to coat a dagger. Andrew had remained silent, his expression a mask of polite disinterest, but his gaze said it all. I didn't belong here. I told myself it was natural. They'd lost their mother, Eleanor, 10 years before Richard met me at a charity dinner in New York. I'd lost my own husband, William Everly, the founder of Everly Global Shipping, 7 years prior, a man who'd left me with not just memories, but a fortune that dwarfed anything the Whitmores could imagine. But Richard didn't know that. I'd let him believe I was simply Margaret, a modestly comfortable widow, happy to find love again in the twilight of my years. I hadn't lied exactly. I'd just omitted the truth. Richard's warmth had melted my defenses during those early months. He'd been a man of charm and laughter, still sharp at 70, with a wit that belied his age. He'd written me letters, actual handwritten notes on thick cream stationery, expressing how much he cherished our time together. I'd kept every one, folded neatly in my jewelry box. I'd believed in the promise of family, of a second chance at happiness. But that evening at the estate, as Richard excused himself to take a business call, I'd stood in the grand library, running my fingers over the spines of leather-bound volumes that probably hadn't been opened in years. And then I heard them, Isabel and Andrew, just outside the library door, their voices low and urgent. "She's after his money," Isabel hissed, her tone dripping with venom. "A gold digger, Andrew. Can't you see it? She's a 65-year-old parasite who swooped in when he was vulnerable." Andrew's reply was cold and calculated. "Don't worry. The prenup is ironclad. And I've spoken to Father's lawyer. He's amending the will next week. She'll be lucky to walk away with a single dollar. She'll be right back where she came from, living in some second-rate condo in Queens." The words sliced through me like a knife. But they were making a mistake. They had no idea who they were dealing with. For 3 years, I had endured their icy stares across the dinner table, the polite but pointed questions about my past. Isabel's patronizing remarks about how difficult it must be to adjust to the Whitmore lifestyle. Andrew's smug lectures about financial management, as if I'd never handled a billion-dollar shipping empire. 3 years of being the outsider, the interloper, the woman who could never measure up to Eleanor Whitmore, the sainted mother who had built this house and whose portrait hung above the fireplace like a silent judge. I had been patient. For Richard's sake. For the sake of the fragile peace he'd tried to preserve between his children and his new wife. But as I stood there in the library, my heart hardening with every whispered word, I knew patience had its limits. They thought they could destroy me with a pen stroke. They thought they could erase me from Richard's life with a few legal maneuvers. What they didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask, was that the gold digger they were plotting against was Margaret Everly Whitmore, sole heir to the Everly shipping fortune, with assets that made the Whitmore holdings look like pocket change. I took a deep breath and let a small, cold smile curve my lips. Let them think they'd won. Let them finalize their plans. Let them believe they had control. Because the moment would come, the perfect moment, when I would show them exactly who they'd underestimated. And when that moment arrived, they would regret every whispered word, every smug glance, every betrayal. Because sometimes the gold digger holds the real gold. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Whitmore estate, casting long shadows across the parquet floors. I sat at the antique breakfast table, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, the bitter heat a comfort against the coldness I felt in my chest. Richard was across from me, his eyes warm and affectionate, oblivious to the quiet war that had begun to rage in his own home. "Margaret, my dear, you seem pensive this morning," he said, his voice gentle. He reached across the table to take my hand, his touch reassuring. "I'm just adjusting," I said lightly, forcing a small smile. "It's a lot to take in, this house, this family. I want to be sure I do everything right." "You've done more than enough," Richard said, his eyes softening. "I know Isabel and Andrew can be set in their ways, but give them time. They'll see what I see." I nodded, though inside I felt the sting of his words. "Time," he said, as if 3 years of enduring their coldness hadn't already been more than enough. As if their quiet war wasn't escalating by the hour. The phone rang in the hallway, and Richard excused himself to answer it, his confident stride a testament to the decades he'd spent running Whitmore Industries. I watched him go, my mind already turning over the conversation I'd overheard the night before. I knew Isabel and Andrew would never accept me. Not as their father's wife, not as a member of their precious family. They saw me as an intruder, someone who had come to steal what they believed was theirs by right. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the battles I'd fought, the empires I'd helped build and sustain. I wasn't some delicate flower who'd fluttered into their world to be trampled under their designer heels. I was a woman who had survived loss, betrayal, and the cold calculations of boardroom wars. As I finished my coffee, I caught sight of Isabel in the doorway, her expression carefully composed. She was dressed immaculately as always, her tailored cream suit crisp against her skin, her blonde hair pulled back into a sleek chignon. "Good morning, Margaret," she said, her tone polite but cool. "Father said you'd be joining us for the quarterly review this afternoon." I met her gaze evenly. "Yes, I'm looking forward to it." A flicker of something, disapproval, suspicion, passed over her face, but she masked it quickly. "Of course. We're discussing some sensitive matters regarding the company's future, so I trust you'll understand if we prefer to keep things discreet." "Discreet?" I echoed, my voice mild. "Of course. I wouldn't dream of overstepping." But Isabel's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she sensed a challenge in my calm tone. She gave me a tight smile and turned to leave, her heels clicking on the marble as she disappeared down the hall. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. The battle lines had been drawn more clearly than ever, and I had no intention of retreating. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the grand boardroom of Whitmore Industries, the walls lined with portraits of Richard's ancestors, their stern faces watching over every decision made within these walls. I took my seat beside Richard at the long, polished table, aware of every glance that shifted in my direction. Isabel was across from me, her posture perfect, her expression one of faint condescension. Andrew sat beside her, his dark hair meticulously groomed, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the mahogany table. The meeting began with polite greetings and carefully worded updates on the company's performance. Richard spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had built an empire, his voice calm and measured as he discussed quarterly projections and market expansions. I listened, my face composed, though my mind was already turning over my own plans. At one point, Isabel leaned forward, her voice cool and precise. "Father, we've been discussing the company's future governance. With the market as volatile as it is, it might be wise to consider establishing a trust, one that would ensure stability for the next generation." Richard frowned slightly. "A trust?" "Yes," Andrew said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "It would allow us to manage the assets more effectively, and of course, protect the family's interests." I saw the flicker of uncertainty in Richard's eyes, the way his shoulders tensed. "And what does that mean for Margaret?" he asked quietly. Isabel didn't miss a beat. She would, of course, receive a comfortable stipend, but the principal would remain with the family. It's a standard arrangement in cases like this. Richard glanced at me, his brow furrowed. "We'll discuss this later," he said, his voice firm. But I could feel the shift in the room, the silent understanding between Isabel and Andrew that their plan was already in motion. As the meeting concluded, I rose with quiet dignity, offering Richard a reassuring smile. "Shall we go home?" I asked softly, my hand light on his arm. He nodded, his expression troubled, and we walked out together. But as we stepped into the elevator, I saw Isabel's reflection in the polished metal doors, her eyes meeting mine in a silent, wordless challenge. They thought they were playing a game of inheritance and control. They thought I was just another woman hoping to secure a slice of the Whitmore fortune. What they didn't know was that I had come into this marriage with a fortune of my own. A fortune I had kept hidden because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I owned. But if they wanted to play this game, I would show them exactly who they were dealing with. And I would make them regret every word they'd whispered behind my back. The study in the Whitmore estate had always been my sanctuary, a place of polished oak and deep leather chairs, the scent of old books and subtle cologne lingering in the air. I often retreated there when the rest of the house felt too heavy, too full of cold stares and whispered slights. But that night, the walls seemed to close in on me, the darkness pressing against the edges of my vision. I sat at the massive mahogany desk, the same one Richard's father had used to sign the papers that expanded Whitmore Industries into a global powerhouse. A legacy they all felt was theirs by blood right. I stared at the gold-plated family crest embedded in the wood, the intertwined W and I, as if it was some ironclad barrier against outsiders like me. My phone, the private line I'd always kept separate from Richard's world, buzzed quietly. I reached for it with hands that felt too steady for the storm that had begun to gather around me. David Turner's name glowed on the screen, my attorney and the only person in this city who knew exactly who Margaret Everly Whitmore really was. "Margaret," his voice was calm, professional, the way I remembered from boardrooms and deal negotiations. "I've been looking over the documents you sent me." "David, they're moving fast," I said, my voice low but clear. "They're pushing for a trust that would leave me with nothing but a token. They think they can freeze me out of Richard's estate." There was a pause, and then the quiet scrape of a pen on paper. I could almost see him at his desk, the glow of his lamp illuminating his lined face. "It's not the first time I've seen a family try to maneuver like this," he said. "But you're not some helpless widow, Margaret. You hold all the cards, you always have. I closed my eyes, letting his words steady me. He was right. I wasn't some desperate hanger-on hoping to cling to Richard's wealth. My fortune from Everly Global Shipping was intact, even after all these years. William had taught me how to protect what was mine. And when he died, I'd taken the reins, steering the company through some of the worst storms the industry had seen. I'd been the quiet force behind the scenes, but every board member knew who signed their paychecks. I want them to understand who they're dealing with, I said, my voice hardening. No more pretending. I've played the role of the gracious second wife for long enough. It's time they met the real Margaret. David chuckled, the sound low and approving. Then let's make sure every piece is in place. I'll draft a letter outlining your assets, your position with Everly Global, and the business interests that would make even the Whitmore fortune look like a rounding error. I smiled then, a cold, precise smile that felt more honest than any I'd given the Whitmore children. Good. And David? I want this to be more than just a confrontation. I want it to be an education. Let's prepare something they can't argue with. Figures, legal holdings, everything. They need to see that I don't need a cent of their inheritance to stand on my own. Understood, he said. When would you like to present this information? The family meeting, I said without hesitation. Isabel mentioned a quarterly governance review. Let's make it an unforgettable one. David's laughter was sharper this time, almost delighted. A quarterly review with a quarterly surprise. I like it. As I ended the call, I set the phone down and stared at the painting that hung over the fireplace. A portrait of Eleanor Whitmore in a flowing gown, her eyes serene and knowing. The woman who had come before me. The woman whose memory still haunted this house, her perfection held up as a silent rebuke to every breath I took. I rose, crossing the room to stand before her. I could almost hear Isabel's voice in my head. Mother would never have let this happen. The words a blade meant to cut, to remind me that I would never measure up. But Eleanor had never known the boardroom battles I'd fought, the empires I'd steered through turbulent seas. She'd never faced down men who underestimated her simply because she wore pearls instead of a power tie. I had. And I had emerged not just intact, but stronger. I reached out and traced the edge of the portrait's gilded frame, my fingers steady. Rest easy, Eleanor, I whispered. Your children are about to learn that respect isn't inherited. It's earned. The sound of footsteps in the hallway drew my attention. The door creaked open, and Richard appeared, his face tired but relieved to see me. Margaret, he said, his voice warm. I was looking for you. Isabel and Andrew have gone home. I wanted to talk to you about the trust. I turned, meeting his gaze squarely. Richard, I know what they're trying to do, I said gently but firmly. And I won't stand by and let it happen. Not to you, and not to me. He looked startled, then sighed. I should have anticipated this, he murmured, running a hand through his silver hair. They've always been protective of the family's wealth, but I never imagined they'd try to cut you out. I crossed the room and took his hand in mine. I know you didn't, and I love you for that. But Richard, I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. There's something I haven't told you. His brow furrowed. What is it? I drew in a breath. Before I met you, I was married to William Everly, Everly Global Shipping. His eyes widened. Everly Global? That's quotation mark. Yes, I said. When he passed, I inherited everything. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be seen for myself, not for my wealth. Richard's expression shifted from shock to wonder. Margaret. I squeezed his hand. I don't need the Whitmore fortune, Richard. I never have. But I need your trust. And together, We're going to show them that respect isn't given by inheritance. It's earned. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in days, I felt the strength of the partnership we'd built. The storm was gathering, but I was ready. Because sometimes the gold digger holds the real gold, and they were about to see just how brightly it shone. The rain tapped a staccato rhythm against the tall windows of the penthouse restaurant, where I had agreed to meet David Turner, my attorney, and the only person I trusted to help me navigate the labyrinth my life had become. The city below was enveloped in the wet glow of streetlights, a river of headlights streaming through the darkness. It felt like the perfect setting for the conversation that was about to unfold. Part strategy session, part confession. David was already seated when I arrived, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and assessing. He stood when he saw me, the warmth in his smile a balm against the coldness that had settled into my bones since the Whitmore children's latest maneuver. "Margaret," he said, his voice low and steady, the same tone that had calmed me through more than one boardroom battle. "I've been following the developments at the estate. It seems the trust proposal was only the beginning." I sank into the chair opposite him, the leather cool against my skin, and folded my hands in my lap. "They've underestimated me, David," I said, my voice a mix of steel and sorrow. "But I'm done playing the patient stepmother. It's time they understood exactly who they're dealing with." He nodded, leaning back slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "That's why we're here. I've prepared a plan, a carefully constructed strategy that will reveal your financial standing, your influence, and your intentions, all at once. But it will also protect your privacy and dignity. Are you ready for that?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, the weight of years pressing down on me. "Yes," I said. "They've treated me like a threat to their inheritance, and in doing so, they've made me one. I won't let them corner me with their trust documents and whispered insults. I'm not the woman they think I am." David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder, setting it on the table between us. "This is everything. Your holdings in Everly Global Shipping, your philanthropic investments, your private portfolio. It's a snapshot of the real Margaret Everly Whitmore, something they can't argue with." I stared at the folder, its sleek leather cover gleaming under the restaurant's dim light. The culmination of a life's work, of sleepless nights and boardroom battles, of sacrifices and victories. A testament not to the gold digger they'd painted me as, but to the woman I had always been. Powerful, resilient, unyielding. "When do we do this?" I asked, my voice low. David's smile was thin but fierce. "At the family board meeting. Isabel and Andrew expect to control the narrative with their trust proposal. You're going to turn their narrative on its head. You'll reveal your holdings and the influence you wield. And then you'll offer them a choice. Accept you as an equal, or face the consequences of alienating the woman who could buy and sell them 100 times over." I met his gaze and felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. "It has to be perfect," I said. "No loose ends, no doubts. They'll look for any crack in the armor, any sign of weakness." David's eyes shone with quiet pride. "There won't be any. I've prepared this the same way you taught me to prepare for every negotiation, with precision and foresight. And Margaret," he added, his voice softening, "you are more than ready for this." The server approached, interrupting the charged silence between us. We ordered quickly, neither of us truly caring what ended up on the plates. The real meal was the strategy that lay between us, the taste of power and truth that would soon be served to the Whitmore children, cold and undeniable. As the server left, I let out a long breath and looked out at the rain-soaked city. I loved Richard for the man he was, not for his money, I said, the words catching in my throat. I let his children think they had the upper hand because I thought I could win them over with kindness. but some people only understand power. David reached across the table, his hand warm and solid as it closed over mine. "Then show them yours," he said simply. And in that moment, I knew I would. The day of the quarterly governance review dawned with a cold, hard edge to the air, a sharpness that mirrored the tension simmering beneath my carefully composed exterior. The Whitmore Industries headquarters loomed like a fortress of glass and steel in the heart of the city, its sleek lines a testament to the family's ironclad grip on power. Today, I was determined to leave my mark on it in a way none of them would ever forget. I arrived early, my tailored navy suit fitting like armor, every detail meticulous. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like the longest of my life. The soft hum of the cables, a quiet counterpoint to the storm that raged inside me. The doors slid open to reveal the boardroom, polished mahogany, high-backed chairs, and the family crest displayed like a silent accusation above the fireplace. Isabel was already there, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of polite indifference. She glanced up from her notes, her eyes cold. "Margaret," she said, her voice crisp, her tone as frosty as the winter wind outside. "I wasn't sure you'd be joining us today." I gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, my voice smooth, but with an undercurrent of steel. Andrew entered next, his dark suit impeccable, his expression guarded. He gave me a nod, the kind that might pass for respect in another context, but felt more like a challenge now. Richard arrived last, his steps slower than they had been in months past, his face lined with worry. He took the seat at the head of the table, his eyes flickering between his children and me. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice low but steady. "We have important matters to discuss today." Isabel cleared her throat and launched into her presentation, her voice cool and practiced as she outlined the trust proposal in excruciating detail. Every word felt like a carefully honed dagger aimed directly at my place in this family. Every clause, every subclause, a way to diminish me, to reduce me to a footnote in Richard's legacy. Andrew spoke next, his tone even colder, his gaze fixed on me as he rattled off numbers and legal jargon designed to intimidate. "It's for the stability of the company, Father," he said, his voice almost a purr. "We can't let emotional entanglements compromise the business." Emotional entanglements. That's what I was to them, a liability, a threat. I sat in silence, my heart pounding, waiting for the perfect moment. When the last word of Andrew's speech died on the air, I let the silence stretch just long enough to feel like a slap. Then I leaned forward, my eyes locked on theirs, my voice steady and calm. "Thank you, Isabel." "Thank you, Andrew," I began, my tone cool but unmistakably commanding. "It's clear you've given this a great deal of thought." I paused, letting the tension build. Now I'd like to present my own perspective. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew the black folder David had prepared. I opened it with deliberate care, letting the pages fall open like a carefully set trap. "Here," I said, sliding it across the table toward Isabel, "is the complete summary of my holdings, Everly Global Shipping, my private investments, and my philanthropic foundations." Andrew's eyes widened, his composure cracking for the first time as he scanned the figures. Isabel's face drained of color, her lips parting in silent shock. "You see," I continued, my voice hardening, "I didn't come into this family seeking a handout. I came in with a net worth that makes the Whitmore fortune look like an endowment for a modest country club." Richard's eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling as they rested on the polished table. "Margaret, I had no idea." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know you didn't, Richard. But I need you to know I never wanted your money. I wanted you. I turned back to Isabel and Andrew, my gaze sharp as a blade. You tried to cut me out, to reduce me to a stipend and a footnote. But you forgot one thing. I've built empires while you were still playing at the kiddie table. I will not be dismissed. I will not be underestimated. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in that room knew it. The air in the conference room felt like it had been sucked out, leaving only the tight press of tension between every heartbeat. The polished mahogany table, the gold-embossed folders, the meticulous arrangement of chairs, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the truth that had just detonated in the middle of the Whitmore empire, leaving shockwaves that rippled through every corner of the room. I watched Isabel's face as she tried to process the numbers laid out in the documents before her, the color draining from her cheeks, the fine tremor in her hands betraying the fear she couldn't quite hide. Andrew sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression a mask of disbelief that crumbled around the edges every time he glanced at the figures. Richard's hand trembled as he lifted the pages from the folder, each sheet a testament to the empire I had built, long before I had become Margaret Everly Whitmore. His eyes flickered to me, then back to the documents, his face lined with regret and something like awe. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the thunderous silence. "How long have you—" I met his gaze squarely, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of every battle I had fought. "Since before you met me," I said evenly. "William left me everything, and I grew it, strategically, patiently. I let you think I was just comfortable, because I wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I own." Isabel's composure snapped like a fragile thread. "So all this time," she spat, her voice trembling with rage and humiliation, "you've been sitting here, letting us think you were some desperate hanger-on, while you've been richer than all of us combined?" Andrew's laugh was sharp, brittle. "No wonder you were so quiet all these years. You must have been laughing at us behind our backs." I leaned forward, my fingers steepled, my voice cold but precise. "Number, I wasn't laughing. I was hoping that one day you'd see me as more than just the woman who married your father. But you didn't. You saw me as a threat, an opportunist, a gold digger. So I let you believe that while I watched. I waited. And now, here we are." Richard's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Margaret, I wish you'd told me." I softened, just enough to let the love I felt for him show through the armor I'd built. "I know," I said gently, "but I needed to be sure that you loved me for me, not for what I could bring to the table. I never wanted you to feel like you were less." He reached for my hand, his grip tight and desperate. "You were never less. You've always been more than enough." The raw vulnerability in his voice reminded me why I'd fought so hard to protect him from the truth. The same truth that had turned Isabel and Andrew against me. I turned back to them, my expression hardening once more. "You thought you could erase me with a trust, with a few lines on a legal document," I said, my voice ringing with the authority of someone who'd fought for every victory she'd earned. "But you forgot one thing. I've played this game before, and I've always played to win." Isabel's chin quivered as she struggled to maintain her mask of superiority. "So what now? You think you're going to take over? Make us your subordinates in our own company?" I let out a low, humorless laugh. "No, Isabel, I don't need to take over. I already hold enough power to do that 100 times over. But I'm not here to destroy the Whitmore legacy. I'm here to protect it, from the two of you, if necessary." Andrew's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing with something between anger and grudging respect. "You really are something else," he muttered. I leaned back, my gaze steady. I am. And if you're smart, you'll realize that having me as an ally is worth more than any trust fund or inheritance. But that's a choice you'll have to make. The silence that followed was a battlefield, littered with the broken pieces of their assumptions. For the first time, they saw me, not as the gold digger they'd branded me, but as the woman who held the real gold in her hands. The Whitmore boardroom had never felt so small. The polished mahogany table, a battlefield littered with shattered illusions. The air hung thick, each breath heavy with the weight of revelation and the scent of fear. Isabel's hands were trembling as she flipped through the folder, her eyes darting over numbers and signatures that left no room for doubt. Andrew's face had turned ashen, his jaw set in a grim line that betrayed the war raging behind his eyes. I watched them, my gaze unwavering, the calm authority I had spent years honing now my shield and my sword. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not just to prove a point, but to reclaim my place, to remind them that I had always been more than the role they had assigned me. Richard's voice broke the silence, ragged with disbelief and something close to wonder. Margaret, I can't believe this. All these years, all this time, and you never said a word. I turned to him, the man who had stolen my heart with his kindness and laughter, the man whose children had tried so hard to make me feel like an intruder in my own home. I didn't want this to be about money, I said softly, my voice steady but tinged with pain. I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I brought to the table. His eyes glistened with tears, his hand reaching across the table to cover mine. I did, he whispered. I do. For a moment, I let myself feel the warmth of his hand, the love I had fought so hard to protect. But then Isabel's voice sliced through the fragile calm like a blade. So this is your plan, she spat, her eyes burning with a mix of rage and humiliation. Humiliate us. Show us how small we are compared to you. Well, congratulations, Margaret. You've done it. Happy now? I didn't flinch. I had faced boardrooms filled with men twice as ruthless as Isabel Whitmore. I had faced shareholders who thought they could bully me into submission. I had faced the icy stares of competitors who saw me as an easy target. I had faced them all, and won. This isn't about humiliation, I said, my voice like steel wrapped in velvet. This is about honesty. It's about respect, something you've denied me since the day I set foot in this house. Andrew slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp as a gunshot. We were protecting our family, he snarled. Mother built this company. Mother built this home. We weren't going to let you waltz in here and take it all away from us. My laugh was low and cold, the sound of a woman who had seen enough to know better. Take it away from you? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. I could have bought and sold Whitmore Industries before breakfast and still had enough left over to buy you both matching yachts. I didn't need this company. I wanted this family. But you made it clear from the start that I was never going to be part of it. Richard's voice shook with emotion. Margaret, I had no idea they were planning this. I would never have allowed it. I met his gaze, my heart softening for just a moment. I know, I said. But the fact that they thought they could do this behind your back, that they thought you'd just go along with it, that says everything. Isabel's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. So what now? She demanded, her voice brittle. You think we're just going to sit here and let you take over everything? I leaned back, my gaze unwavering. No, I said simply. I'm not here to take over. I'm here to take my place. A place I've earned through loyalty, patience, and strength. The question is whether you can accept that, or whether you're going to keep fighting a battle you've already lost. The room fell silent, the only sound the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. each second a reminder that the world had changed, and they could either adapt or be left behind. Because sometimes the gold digger holds the real gold, and sometimes she's the one who decides who keeps their seat at the table. The sun was setting by the time the meeting ended, the city skyline blazing like a battlefield caught between day and night. The air in the boardroom was thick with the residue of harsh words and shattered assumptions. Andrew and Isabel had left in silence, their faces pale and drawn, the weight of their defeat heavy on their shoulders. Richard remained behind, his hand still resting on the table, the lines of worry etched deeper into his face than I had ever seen them before. I lingered a moment longer, letting the silence settle like dust after an earthquake. Then I gathered my folder, the black leather cool and smooth under my fingers, and turned to leave. "Margaret," Richard called, his voice rough with emotion. I paused, turning to face him. "Don't let them ruin this," he said, his eyes pleading. "Don't let this destroy what we've built together." I met his gaze, my own eyes steady, though inside my heart ached with the weight of everything that had transpired. "I won't," I promised. "But they need to understand that I'm not going to be silent anymore. If they want to share this family, this company, this legacy, they're going to have to accept me as an equal." He nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. "I know, and I'm proud of you, Margaret. More than you know." His words warmed me in a way that surprised me, cutting through the frost that had built up over the last few days. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more to me than you realize." As I stepped out into the hall, my phone buzzed with a message. I checked it, my stomach tightening as I read the words. "Meet me in the executive lounge in 10 minutes. Zranya, Andrew." A flicker of caution sparked in my mind. Andrew didn't summon people, he commanded. But curiosity, and perhaps a touch of strategic opportunity, propelled me forward. The executive lounge was empty except for him. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette sharp against the dying light, a whiskey glass in his hand. He didn't turn as I entered, but his voice carried, cold and brittle. "You played your hand well," he said. "I didn't see it coming." I closed the door softly behind me, the click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You underestimated me," I replied, my voice calm, a thread of steel running through it. He turned then, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You humiliated us, Margaret. You made us look like fools." I didn't flinch. "You did that to yourselves," I said evenly. "You plotted to cut me out. You thought you could push me aside like some unwanted guest in my own home. I didn't start this fight, Andrew, but I'm damn sure going to finish it." His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. "You think you've won? You think one little revelation is going to keep you safe? I have friends on the board. I have allies in places you can't even imagine. I can make your life a living hell." I laughed then, a low, cold sound that made him stiffen. "You think I haven't heard that before? I've stared down men twice as powerful as you, Andrew. I've watched them fold when they realized I wasn't the woman they'd imagined. If you want to try to ruin me, go ahead. But understand this. I have more resources, more connections, and more experience than you could ever dream of. And I won't hesitate to use them." He took a step closer, his breath hot and ragged, his anger a living thing. "I won't let you take everything from us," he spat. "I won't let you destroy our family." I leaned in, my eyes locked on his, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I'm not the one destroying this family, Andrew. You and Isabel did that the moment you decided that protecting your inheritance mattered more than your father's happiness. You started this war, now you have to live with the consequences." For a moment, he faltered, the fight draining from his eyes. Then he threw the whiskey glass against the window, the glass shattering in a spray of amber liquid and shards that caught the dying sunlight. "Get out!" he growled, his voice raw. "Just get out." I turned without another word, my heels clicking sharply against the marble as I walked away, the sound of broken glass crunching underfoot. I felt no fear, no regret, only the clarity that comes when the lines have been drawn and the sides chosen. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding closed behind me, I pulled out my phone and dialed David's number. He answered on the first ring. "David," I said, my voice calm but urgent. "We need to move forward with the proposal. Andrew's going to try to sabotage it, and I won't let him." David's voice was steady, unwavering. "Understood. I'll have the documentation ready by morning. We'll show them who really holds the power in this family." The elevator hummed as it descended, the city lights flickering below like a field of stars. I had thought I could be part of this family by earning their respect. But tonight, I realized the truth. Sometimes respect isn't given. Sometimes it has to be taken. And I was ready to take it, no matter the cost. The morning after the confrontation with Andrew dawned gray and cold, the kind of sky that made even the most determined souls pause at the threshold. I stood by the window in my private sitting room, the city skyline a jagged silhouette against the slate sky. My reflection in the glass was a stranger, shoulders squared, eyes steely, every line of my face drawn with a determination that had been tempered in fire. The woman staring back at me was no longer the quiet stepmother, the polite guest in the Whitmore empire. She was something else now, an adversary they'd never expected. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Catherine's voice came through, tentative but insistent. "Margaret? May I come in?" I turned, smoothing the front of my tailored blouse, my expression composed. "Of course, Catherine. Come in." She entered with a kind of quiet grace that reminded me so much of her father, a presence that didn't demand space, but naturally claimed it. She closed the door behind her and stood, hesitant, the worry lines on her forehead deeper than usual. "I heard about what happened yesterday," she said, her voice low. He's not taking this well." A bitter smile curved my lips. "No, I imagine he isn't." Catherine crossed the room, her gaze steady. "He told me you humiliated him, that you undermined the family." I let out a humorless laugh, cold and sharp. "He humiliated himself, Catherine. He tried to cut me out of your father's life, out of this family, because he couldn't stand the idea of sharing power with someone he couldn't control." Her eyes searched mine, troubled. "You're not like the others," she said softly. "I've always known that. When you first came here, I thought—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together, her eyes glistening. "You thought I was here for the money," I finished for her. "Like everyone else." She shook her head. I thought you were too quiet, too reserved. I thought you'd let them walk all over you." I felt a pang of regret at the realization that she'd seen the battle from the sidelines, powerless to stop it. "I did," I admitted. "For a while. Because I loved your father, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could earn their respect by being patient, by showing them I wasn't a threat." Her brow furrowed. "And now?" "Now," I said, my voice firm. "I've learned that respect in this family isn't earned with patience. It's earned with power." Catherine's expression shifted, a quiet strength settling into her features. "Andrew called me this morning," she said, her voice trembling. "He said he's going to the board. He's going to try to convince them to vote against your proposal." A surge of anger, hot and immediate, burned through me. "Of course he is," I muttered. "He can't stand the thought of losing control. She took a step closer, her eyes fierce. But Margaret, he doesn't know I've already read your proposal, and I've spoken to some of the board members. They respect you. They're tired of his arrogance. They think you're the one who can lead them into the future. Hope flared in my chest, unexpected but undeniable. Catherine, I whispered, why are you telling me this? Because I believe in you, she said simply. Because I've watched you face them with more grace and strength than they deserve. Because you're not just my father's wife. You're the woman who kept this family from tearing itself apart. And because if we don't stand together now, Andrew will destroy everything. Emotion caught me by surprise, tightening my throat. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you, I said. That means more to me than you know. She took a deep breath. So what's our next move? A smile, sharp, confident, curved my lips. We fight back. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, legal documents, and whispered conversations with allies I never knew I had. David worked tirelessly, his calm, methodical mind weaving the net that would catch Andrew in his own trap. The following evening, the boardroom at Whitmore Industries was filled to capacity, every executive in attendance, the tension so thick it felt like breathing through wool. Andrew sat at the head of the table, his eyes cold and triumphant, the board members arranged like loyal soldiers. Isabel sat to his right, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. Catherine stood beside me, her presence a quiet pillar of support. Andrew rose, his voice smooth as he began. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to discuss a matter that threatens the very future of this company. My father's wife has presented a proposal that, if enacted, would fundamentally alter the governance of Whitmore Industries. She would have us believe she has our best interests at heart, but I ask you, can we trust someone who has hidden so much from us? The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flickering to me, uncertainty in their faces. Andrew's words had weight, and he knew it. I stood then, my heart pounding but my face composed. Andrew is right about one thing, I said, my voice calm but edged with steel. I have hidden something, but not because I wanted to deceive you. I kept my financial background private because I wanted this family to accept me for who I am, not for what I own. But when Andrew and Isabel tried to cut me out with a trust that would leave me powerless, I realized the only way to earn your respect was to show you the truth. I paused, letting the words sink in. I have built empires. I have steered companies through storms that would have sunk lesser leaders. I am not here to take over Whitmore Industries. I am here to strengthen it, to bring it into a future where we stand together as a family, not as factions at war. Andrew's face flushed with anger, his jaw tight. She's manipulating you, he spat. She wants control. She wants to destroy everything our mother built. I met his gaze, unflinching. Your mother built a legacy. I respect that. But legacies are not preserved by exclusion. They're preserved by evolution. And right now, this company needs to evolve. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the wind rattling the windows. Catherine's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent vote of confidence. One by one, the board members shifted, their expressions thoughtful. One cleared his throat, his voice hesitant but clear. I believe Margaret is right. We need strong leadership, leadership that looks beyond old grudges. Another nodded. I've seen what she's done, how she's handled this family's mess. I trust her to do what's best for Whitmore Industries. Andrew's face drained of color, the power slipping from his grasp like sand through his fingers. Richard stood then, his voice trembling with emotion. Margaret has my full support, he said. She's proven herself time and again. She's not just my wife, she's my partner. And in that moment, I knew. I had fought, I had stood my ground, and I had earned the one thing I had always wanted: respect. Not just from Richard, but from the family that had tried so hard to shut me out. I turned to Andrew, my voice calm but unyielding. This isn't about winning or losing, Andrew. This is about family. And today, I've proven that I am, and always will be, part of it. His eyes fell, his silence an admission of defeat. And as the boardroom erupted in quiet applause, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest, a peace that had been a long time coming. The night air felt sharp as I stepped onto the balcony outside the Whitmore boardroom, the city lights stretching below like a river of diamonds. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation inside, the final showdown that had stripped every layer of pretense from our carefully constructed lives. The echoes of my own voice rang in my ears, each word a blade I'd wielded with precision and restraint. I closed my eyes, letting the cold wind brush my face, the relief mingling with an ache that felt bone deep. I had fought for my place at that table, for Richard's trust, for the respect of the children who'd once looked at me like I was a trespasser in their perfect world. I'd shown them who I really was, and who I had always been beneath the polite smiles and quiet dinners. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I turned to see Catherine standing in the doorway, her eyes wide and searching. "Margaret," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you sooner." I shook my head, a soft smile forming despite the tears that threatened. "You stood up when it mattered most," I whispered. "And that's all I ever wanted, from any of you." She came to stand beside me, her hands wrapped around the railing as if to anchor herself. "Andrew and Isabel, I think they finally understand now. What you've done, what you've built, it's incredible. They just didn't see it before." My breath hitched. "I didn't need them to see the money," I said, my voice raw. "I needed them to see me, to see that I wasn't here to take something from them, but to give something back." Catherine's eyes glistened. "They were wrong about you. I was wrong about you." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's hard to see people for who they are when you're afraid of losing what you think is yours," I murmured. "But sometimes, the person you're pushing away is the one who can help you most." We stood there in silence, the city spread out beneath us, a sea of lights that felt both infinite and intimate. For the first time since I'd walked into the Whitmore estate, I felt like I'd finally claimed my place, not through force or manipulation, but through truth. Inside, I could hear Richard's voice, warm and sure, speaking to the board members, praising my strength, my loyalty, my vision. The family that had once tried to shut me out was now fighting to let me in. And as I turned back toward the light of the boardroom, I knew that Margaret Everly Whitmore had finally, irrevocably, found her home. The final days before the official board vote were a blur of whispered conversations, late-night phone calls, and quiet but deliberate gestures of reconciliation. Richard's unwavering support was the pillar I leaned on, his quiet strength a reminder of why I'd chosen this path. But it was Catherine's subtle but unflinching loyalty that carried me through the darkest hours. She met me in the study one evening, the soft lamplight casting gentle shadows across her thoughtful face. "Margaret," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I've spoken to every board member personally. They've seen the documents you shared, and they've listened to what you've said. They know now that you're not just here for the money." I met her gaze, my throat tightening. "That was never the point," I said, my voice husky. "I wanted them to see me, not as the woman who married into their family, but as the woman who could help them hold it together." Catherine's eyes softened, the admiration there so stark it almost made me flinch. "You've done that," she said firmly. You've shown them your strength. And I think even Andrew and Isabel are beginning to see it, whether they admit it or not. A quiet laugh escaped me, bitter and sweet. They don't have to love me, I said, my tone a mix of exhaustion and resolve. They just have to respect me. She reached out, her fingers brushing mine. They will, she whispered. The next morning, the boardroom hummed with a quiet intensity that felt like the final breath before a storm. I entered with my head held high, every step measured, every gesture deliberate. Richard's hand found mine as I took my seat beside him, his silent support a balm against the chill of the tension that filled the room. Andrew's eyes met mine, the defiance there softened by something that might have been regret. Isabel looked down at her notes, her fingers trembling just slightly. I cleared my throat, the silence falling like a heavy curtain. Before we begin, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, I want to thank each of you for giving me the opportunity to speak my truth. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but this family deserves to move forward with honesty, not assumptions. As I paused, Catherine's gaze met mine, steady and unwavering. I'm not asking for your love, I continued, only for your respect and the chance to prove that I can be part of this family, not because of what I own, but because of who I am. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words sinking in. And in that quiet, I felt the first threads of a new beginning being woven, one built not on whispered accusations, but on hard-won truth. And I knew, finally, that I had claimed my place in this family, forever. The morning light streamed through the windows of the Whitmore estate, soft but unyielding, like the truth that had finally settled over this family. I stood at the balcony outside my room, the city skyline glinting in the distance, a horizon that felt both familiar and new. Inside, the house was alive with a cautious kind of energy. The staff moved with hushed voices, the air charged with the remnants of yesterday's confrontation. Catherine had left early for a meeting, but not before slipping a note under my door. I believe in you. I pressed the paper to my chest, a smile playing at my lips. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Downstairs, I found Richard in the sunroom, his coffee cup balanced on his knee, his gaze fixed on the garden beyond the glass. He looked older today, lines of worry etched deeper than ever. But when he turned to me, his eyes were warm, proud. "Margaret," he said, his voice catching just slightly. "I've never been more sure of anything than I am of you." I crossed the room and took his hand, the heat of his skin grounding me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I know this hasn't been easy." He let out a breath, a quiet laugh that held both relief and sadness. "Easy? Number but necessary." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. Andrew and Isabel will need time. But Catherine, she's a bridge. She sees what this family can become. Richard's eyes shone with emotion. "You've done more for this family than any of us ever could have, Margaret. You've taught us what it means to fight for respect, and to earn it." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them away, refusing to let them fall. "I fought my whole life," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "For every dollar, every deal, every ounce of respect. But this fight was different. It was about belonging, about proving that I wasn't just some woman who married into your world. I was someone who could make it better." He squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "And you have," he said fiercely. "You've changed everything." A quiet knock sounded at the door. Isabel stood there, her eyes downcast, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret," she said, her voice strained, "may I speak with you?" I straightened, a thread of hope winding through my chest. Of course. As she stepped into the room, I felt the tide turning, the walls crumbling. Respect wasn't just earned in the boardroom, it was earned in the quiet moments when the heart spoke louder than the mind. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, I knew that no matter what came next, I had finally carved out my place in this family, unshakable, undeniable, and stronger than any legacy they'd tried to keep from me. The sun had barely crested the horizon when I followed Isabel into the small sitting room off the main hall, a space Eleanor had once claimed as her own. It smelled faintly of lavender and old money, and for a moment, I could almost feel the ghost of her presence, watching us from every shadowed corner. The air was heavy with unspoken words, and the weight of the years that had built these walls around us. Isabel moved with a tension that betrayed the strength she fought so hard to project. She wore a tailored navy suit, power clothes for a woman used to command, but today her shoulders sagged just slightly, and the edges of her control were fraying. She stopped near the fireplace, her back to me, her hands clasped so tightly they'd gone white. "Margaret," she began, her voice taut with effort. I've been thinking about what you said, about respect." I stood near the window, the light catching the edges of the room, making her look more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I waited, letting her find the words she needed. She turned slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and searching. "I didn't understand. I thought I did. I thought I knew what this family was, what it stood for." She swallowed hard. "But after everything you revealed, I see now that maybe I never really saw anything at all." My heart ached at the rawness in her voice. I took a step closer. "Isabel, I never wanted to take anything from you. I wanted to be part of something your mother built, something your father continued. But I couldn't be part of it if I was always fighting to prove I belonged." Her lips trembled, and she turned away, staring into the empty fireplace. "Mother, she was everything to me. She taught me to be strong, to be independent. She taught me that our family's legacy was something sacred, something that had to be protected at all costs." A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the morning light like a diamond. "But she also taught me to trust my instincts. And my instincts have been screaming at me these last few days that I've been wrong. About you. About everything." I reached out, my hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We both made mistakes," I said softly. "I should have told you about my past sooner. I should have trusted you to see me for who I really am." She let out a shaky laugh, the sound fragile but real. "Trust goes both ways, doesn't it?" "It does," I agreed, "and I'm willing to try if you are." She turned then, her eyes meeting mine, the vulnerability there so raw it made me want to weep. "I don't know if I can ever undo the things I've said," she whispered, "but I want to try." I felt something loosen in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I pulled her into a hug, and for a moment, the years of tension, the whispered insults, the silent dinners, none of it mattered. It was just two women, standing in the ruins of old wounds, choosing to build something new. When we pulled apart, she straightened, the old steel returning to her spine. "Andrew's still angry," she said. "He's not going to let this go easily." I nodded, my resolve hardening. Let him be angry. He's going to learn that respect isn't something you can buy or inherit. It's something you fight for. We left the sitting room together, a fragile alliance formed in the crucible of truth. The boardroom was already filling when we arrived. David Turner stood near the head of the table, his calm authority radiating from every inch of his posture. Richard was there too, his face drawn but resolute, his eyes meeting mine with a pride that made my chest tighten. Catherine sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her expression one of quiet confidence. Andrew, of course, was already holding court at the far end of the table, his voice low and urgent as he spoke to a few board members, men who had always been quick to back the strongest voice in the room. But today, the strength in his voice sounded forced, the edges too sharp, the desperation too obvious. When he saw Isabel and me enter together, his eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring. "So, the two of you are a team now?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. Isabel didn't flinch. "We're a family," she said firmly, "and it's time we started acting like one." Andrew's lips twisted, his laughter cold and hollow. "You really think she cares about this family? She's been playing us from the beginning. You're a fool if you believe otherwise." Before Isabel could reply, I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I've fought for everything I've ever had, Andrew," I said, each word steady, deliberate. "I didn't marry into this family for its money. I had my own before I ever met Richard. I married into this family because I believed in it, because I believed in building something together. You tried to push me out, to reduce me to nothing more than a footnote. But I refused to let you." Andrew rose, his face flushed, his eyes blazing. "You think you're better than us? That you can just waltz in here and take over everything we've built?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Andrew. I think I can stand beside you, as an equal. But if you're too blind to see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't deserve to sit at this table." A murmur rippled through the room, the board members shifting in their seats. Some looked at Andrew with doubt in their eyes, others with disappointment. I could see the cracks forming, the fragile foundation of his authority beginning to crumble. Richard stood then, his voice firm but gentle. "Andrew, Margaret has proven her worth time and again. She's brought strength, stability, and vision to this family, something we need now more than ever. If you can't see that, then perhaps it's time you asked yourself what you're really afraid of." Andrew's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Isabel, but her expression offered no comfort. Finally, he sank back into his seat, his posture deflated, his eyes dull. David cleared his throat, his voice calm and commanding. "I think it's time we voted on the proposal. Those in favor of Margaret's inclusion as a full partner in the family trust and board, please raise your hands." One by one, hands rose, Catherine's first, followed by Isabel's, then a cascade of board members who had once only seen me as the gold digger they'd been warned about. Even Richard raised his hand, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Andrew's hand remained stubbornly at his side, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The tide had turned. David nodded. "The motion passes. Congratulations, Margaret." The room erupted in quiet applause, the sound washing over me like a baptism. I felt something inside me shift, an old wound finally beginning to heal. As the meeting adjourned, Richard took my hand, his voice low but full of emotion. "You've earned this, Margaret. Every bit of it." I squeezed his hand, a smile breaking through the tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you," I whispered, "for believing in me." Isabel approached then, her posture hesitant, but her eyes warm. "We have a lot of work to do," she said. I nodded, the weight of the future settling on my shoulders. "Yes," I agreed. "But this time, we'll do it together." Andrew lingered at the doorway, his expression guarded, but for the first time, I saw a flicker of something, respect, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. He gave me a small, grudging nod before slipping away. The sun was fully risen now, the light pouring through the windows like a promise. I stood in that boardroom, the place that had once felt like a cage, and felt it transform into a kingdom. a place I had fought for and claimed with every piece of myself. And as the applause faded and the room emptied, I knew that Margaret Everly Whitmore had finally found her seat at the table, not because of the money she brought, but because of the woman she'd always been. Strong, unbreakable, and finally, respected. As I stood in that boardroom, the echoes of my own voice still hanging in the air, I felt the weight of every battle I'd fought, every insult I'd endured, every moment I doubted myself. But I also felt something stronger, a fire that no one could put out. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one I would write on my own terms. Because the gold digger they'd tried to brand me as had revealed herself to be the woman who held their legacy in her hands, and not just in numbers or net worth, but in the quiet strength of someone who had learned the hard way that respect isn't given. It's earned. To every woman who's ever been underestimated, to every person who's been cast aside and called less than what they are, know this: your worth isn't defined by the names they call you. I am Margaret Everly Whitmore, and I am not just a survivor, I am a force. Thank you for being here. Her journey was heavy, but it led her back to herself. Watch another powerful story by clicking on the left, and don't forget to subscribe for more voices that deserve to be heard.